Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. After about 40 hours or so of gameplay in the beta, I think I'm finally ready to talk a little bit about Overwatch. You probably heard my opinions already if you've been listening to the last few podcasts. It's been on our minds quite a bit. A lot of us that got in have been playing it almost non-stop, sometimes at the expense of other titles that people are kind of surprised that we're not spending more time with. And I keep saying, well, Overwatch, why aren't you playing Battlefront? Why aren't you playing Fallout 4? And the answer, I think, is a fairly simple one. A lot of us having a lot of fun playing Overwatch, and we don't really want to stop. So, here are my thoughts based on the beta and quite a lot of play of it. What I think of the game in its current state, and where I think it actually needs to go in order to be a long-term success. The business model, in particular, being a concern for some people. So, for those who don't know, Overwatch is a team-based, class-based, multiplayer-only first-person shooter brought to you by Blizzard Entertainment. It is a 6-on-6 game, and it currently has in beta 21 characters, each of which have their own weapons and kit and roles. And your aim is to win on a combination of two different game types as either attack or defense. There is a basic capture point type, which is as simple as standing in the red square until you cap and clearing out enemies that are trying to defend it. And there is a payload mode, which is of course lifted from Team Fortress 2 pretty much whole cloth, in which an item will move through the battlefield, and it will move faster if you happen to be standing next to it, and of course it will stop if you are not, and it will gradually slide backwards if the defensive team is able to keep you away from it. Those are the two game modes. They do tend to combine them in certain maps. There'll be a map where you have to capture point A and then payload the rest of the way, and so on and so forth. As it stands, those are the modes that the beta currently offers. There are quite a few maps on offer, and as I mentioned before, 21 characters, each of which have their own weapons and kit. So let's deal first, I suppose, with the elephant in the room, which is the comparison to Team Fortress 2. A fairly obvious comparison in many ways. One, the game looks quite colourful and cartoony and stylized, ergo it's gotta be like TF2. I've seen this for loads of games over the past 10 or so years, the comparison to Team Fortress 2. Anything that's colourful, anything that's not super realistic, gotta look like TF2. I mean, it really doesn't look like TF2 actually at all. If you compare the two graphic styles, they're clearly not alike, but they're both very colourful, very over-the-top, very larger-than-life games in terms of their aesthetic design. Overwatch is clearly the newer of the two when it comes to its actual graphical fidelity. I mean, TF2 did come out over 8 years ago now, so it is to be expected, and as a result is using more advanced tech and generally looks better with higher texture quality, nicer particle effects, and all that kind of thing. But the way that it looks is really not that important. How does it play? Does it play in a similar way to Team Fortress 2? Well, the comparisons are justified, I think, considering that Blizzard seems to have basically lifted one of the main modes from Team Fortress 2, that being payload. And yeah, it's a good mode and it works very, very well, but there's very little that Overwatch does to distinguish itself in terms of game modes from Team Fortress 2. So if it was looking to escape that comparison there, then it certainly failed. But that to me is where any of the strict comparisons end, because while it is a class-based game, I would say that Overwatch, while clearly taking some inspiration from Team Fortress 2, has obviously taken a little bit more from games like Dota and League of Legends and Smite and all that sort of thing. And you might be thinking, well, why on earth would you believe that? Well, it should be fairly obvious when you look at the way that the classes are set up. The classes are set up with a weapon, sometimes two, but usually one weapon. And said weapon has infinite ammo, and that's their primary attack, and they usually have a couple of different abilities and an ultimate. The ultimate is charged up through various means, usually through doing damage or doing the kind of thing the class is supposed to do. If the class is a healer, then they're going to build up their meter by doing that. If they're a tank with a shield, chances are they can build up some meter by taking some damage for their team, and of course, if you're an attacker, you're probably going to be building up meter via killing people. And of course, that's not wholly the domain of games like League of Legends and Dota, is it? You know, Team Fortress 2 has a similar mechanic with the medic. You know, you charge up and then you're able to do your overcharge and all that kind of thing. But in this case, of course, every single character has an ultimate of some description. And it's the way that those ultimates are designed and how they affect the game which brings me to those comparisons to Dota and League of Legends. You see, while you have a couple of abilities per character, the ultimates are game changers. They are huge clutch plays, they are massive swings, potentially, depending on which character you happen to be playing. And as a result, they create a very similar competitive environment to League of Legends and Dota when it comes to choosing your composition and engaging correctly. A clutch ultimate can wipe out an enemy team, and wiping out an enemy team and sending them all back to base and having them jog back up to the point could be enough to win the game, and there are plenty of games that are won with clutch ultimates. Not every character has the ability to completely change the landscape of the battle with their ultimate. Some are a little bit less powerful than others. Some are, of course, used more frequently, some charge slower, but there are plenty which can wipe out an enemy team, and there are also ultimates which combo very nicely together and can result in those amazing called plays. Those are the sort of things that I really enjoy watching in Dota and League of Legends. And I think some of the most famous moments in those games come from those big ultimates, and often from the combination of more than one, because of course ultimates do synergize quite well together. A great example in Overwatch of something working the same way would of course be Zarya's ultimate. Zarya is a large tank character, and her ultimate is sort of like a black hole, sucks everybody together. You can combo that with a wide variety of great offensive abilities such as Pharah's Death from Above, raining missiles down on the target, Reaper's Death Blossom in which he spins around murdering everything in a short radius. There are all sorts of different things that can work really, really well together and bring you those awesome team-focused moments. And that to me is what Overwatch is really all about. Big, team-focused plays. And thankfully the game does allow you to actually do that even in a public group. The game has a very robust voice over IP system right out of the bat, which works really, really well. It also has a wide variety of emotes, and of course the standard character box, which will warn you about things like snipers and say, hey, I need to be healed, and all that sort of thing. It's actually very easy to play together as a team in Overwatch, even if you're not queued up with somebody else. Pretty damn important aspect as far as I'm concerned, and I'm glad that they seem to understand that you need various means to communicate with your team in this team-based FPS. It sounds obvious, really, and yet you see so many games come out these days that don't have that sort of level of communication and the means to actually interact with your team and work as a team together, even in a public group, so it's pretty damn important. Now let's talk about characters, and perhaps more importantly, switching between them, because that's kind of a key point that a lot of people seem to be missing, especially when they want to talk about balance with Overwatch. So you've got 21 characters, so needless to say, you're going to have some characters that are good against others and not so great against others. And unfortunately, a lot of people like to draw balance as a one versus one thing. X character versus Y character. If X beats Y character this much, then X character is OP. Which of course isn't really true, because this is a game based on composition, more so than it is on pure FPS skill. That's why I think a lot of people are getting hung up, because they don't seem to really understand that. Team Fortress 2 players probably get it pretty well. Yeah, sure, you can kill any class as any other class, but some classes are going to have a lot more difficulty doing it 1v1 than others. And that's okay, because not only can you switch your class to something that will work better against what the opponent has, but you have your teammates who are there to supplement you and are there to back you up and fill in for your weaknesses. And that's why class-based gameplay works so well in games like that. It's also why it works, and indeed is essential, in games like Dota 2, League of Legends, etc. You don't expect certain characters to be able to beat other characters 1v1, which is why you avoid those situations entirely and work with your team. It's about how your team works together, not about how each individual player operates. Now, when you accept that, you're able to abandon a lot of the traditional tenets of FPS, and you can start to look at ideas which maybe wouldn't make sense in a purely competitive, frag-based KD sort of game like, say, Call of Duty. In Call of Duty, if you've got a gun which is easier to shoot, more powerful than all the others, then of course people are going to use it. I mean, why wouldn't they? There's no reason for them not to. And as a result, people start to complain, this weapon's too easy, I have to work harder to get my kills, etc, etc. And the balance works that way. In the case of Overwatch, you can have characters, and indeed you will have characters that are clearly overpowered versus other characters. You'll have weapons that are clearly easier to use than other weapons. And that's okay, because you're not fighting 1v1, you're fighting the team. This opens up some very interesting avenues when it comes to character design. I like to highlight Winston, one of my personal favorites. Now, Winston is in the tank class, but surprisingly enough, he's not actually that much of a tank. He's more about disrupting the enemy. There's a lot of tanks in the game that are designed to take damage and take hits, and you can do that using the barrier, but Winston is more about jumping around and being a nuisance and he has a Tesla gun which allows him to do that. And the Tesla gun requires almost no aiming whatsoever. It's a chain lightning gun, fairly short range. It will lock onto anybody that you can see within your kind of cone of view, and it will zap them. And it will keep zapping them until they die, hopefully. He can also leap around like an idiot, and his ultimate gets rid of his gun entirely and lets him leap around, doubles his HP, and knock people all over the place. Kill people? Maybe not so much, you know, it's not that great for that, but it's amazing at disrupting the enemy. As a result, what you have is a character whose gun is really easy to use, comparable to almost every other gun in the game. And yet that's okay, because it's still balanced in terms of team composition. I might not be able to kill too many people with Winston, but I sure as hell can zone off areas. I sure as hell can disrupt enemy defenses. I sure as hell can get a lot of aggro on me while the squishier characters on my team are getting the legwork done. And that's what that character is entirely designed around. There's another tank called Reinhardt who could really just hold up his shield the entire game, which is a 2000 HP shield which you can hold up and sort of angle to absorb bullets and incoming fire and do nothing but march forward slowly the entire game and actually win the game for you. Doesn't have to do anything else, doesn't have to kill a single person, and yet he's still effective. And that, to me, takes the principle of both TF2 and Dota-style games and implements it successfully into a new brand of team-focused FPS. And what's interesting about that is that not only does it result in some really dynamic team-focused gameplay, but it also results in a game that evolves throughout the match. Because you can pick whatever hero you want at any time. There's no restriction. Now, there's no heroes locked behind a paywall, and we'll talk a little bit more about business model later on in the video, but if you want to pick 6 Winstons, you can pick 6 Winstons. The thing is that it's only going to work for a limited time before the enemy team goes, screw this, I'm going to pick 6 Reapers, or whatever it is that works well against that. You can go for balanced compositions, you can go for unbalanced compositions, you can change your composition depending on where you are on the level, and in fact you should. You know, there are heroes that I like to use while pushing point A, and then there are heroes I switch to while going to B, depending on what map I'm playing, and that is of course a key difference between things like Dota and this game, because of course with Dota you pick the composition that you think is best suited against the other team, and that's the one you're stuck with the entire time. Now, you do have the ability to evolve your composition through item builds, which will allow you to adapt to what the opponent is doing. In this game, you adapt to what the opponent is doing by changing up your hero lineup, by changing up your character lineup. And what I'm noticing from a lot of new players that are entering the beta is they don't seem to understand that. They pick a hero and they stick with it the entire time. And that's a mistake. I don't necessarily blame them too much for it, because honestly, you need quite a lot of knowledge as to which character is good against what in what situation in order to accurately choose the character at any given time. And of course, you can't really do that if you don't have that knowledge, if you haven't played enough to realize what's good. Is you're not simply picking a character to counter another character, you're picking a comp to counter a comp. 6 characters to counter 6 other characters in a certain situation, in a certain area of the map. I mean, this is a game that very much has things like timings, a principle that's used in both League of Legends, Dota, and of course StarCraft 2. The idea that you can take advantage of a particular situation at a particular time window with a certain strategy and composition of units. And that's actually how Overwatch works. Overwatch is a game that on first glance I think is deceptively simple. And yet, in fact, it actually has a lot of layers of strategy underneath that are unlocked and peeled away as you start to figure out the game and how different compositions, duos, and even 6-on-6 kind of team setups work on particular maps. Learning the maps is, of course, very important. Learning the best place to defend, learning the best place to set up turrets, teleporters, all that kind of thing. Learning the best choke points in which AoE and ultimates will be the most effective. These are all sort of things that you need to learn. And while the game is very easy to dive into, which I think is one of its strengths, I feel that mastering Overwatch, particularly as a team, is actually going to take quite a lot of work. The thing is that Overwatch does what TF2 does. There are plenty of characters that you can jump into that are just really easy to start with. And I see a lot of people, of course, that jump into TF2 will play a heavy. I mean, why wouldn't you? You move slowly, you have a large health pool, and you gun down anyone that comes anywhere near you with your chain gun. Very easy character to use. But there's a lot of nuance to him. And of course, there's a lot of nuance to both countering him and working with him as part of your team composition. The nice thing about Overwatch is that it seems like the characters have something for everybody. You want to be a very passive player? Well, there are plenty of characters that do that. You can play Mercy, who is a healer that acts very much like the medic in TF2 with a healing beam that can also be switched to a damage beam. Her ultimate is a mass revive, brings everybody in the team back to life, and she can also fly towards the character that she's locked onto using shift. So she's got a bit of mobility there. Very easy character to use, but of course, learning enough battlefield awareness to be really good with her, learning who to heal at the right time, who to damage boost at the right time, which character benefits most from that damage boost at that given moment, rather than just sticking to one character. Well, that is what distinguishes a Mercy from a good Mercy. You want to build a turret and just babysit it all game? Sure, you can be Torbjorn and you can do that. But of course, a great Torbjorn is not only going to have great positioning, but they're also going to be able to gather enough scrap to hand out armor packs to their fellow teammates, which is going to make them much, much more resilient. And of course, they need to learn how to use their gun, because their turret can't necessarily handle itself if it's under a lot of pressure. And then, of course, if you want to be a twitchy player, well, there's all sorts of characters like that. In fact, there are characters which will reward your skill if you've played a previous FPS. You know, if you're a great guy with rockets in Quake, you might want to be considering Pharah. Accuracy with rockets in this game is extremely important. You can do a lot with her. If you're the sort of person that likes to do concussion jumping and nice little tricks in the Team Fortress Classic, then perhaps you might want to consider something like Junkrat. Or, of course, you're a very twitchy player that likes to move around a lot. Tracer's a great option for you there. It seems to me that you can enter this game at almost any level of skill and still have a good time, and yet I think that the game actually has long-term competitive potential. Right now, it's a bit of a nightmare to spectate. Watching that game from a first-person perspective is difficult. Unlike Counter-Strike, which I think is a very clean game to watch, there's a lot of visual noise on the screen when it comes to Overwatch. It's a very noisy game, it's a very colorful, riotous game, and I use that term deliberately because it actually reminds me more of League of Legends more so than anything else. It can be very confusing to a spectator that doesn't know what all of these abilities do as to what is going on, especially if multiple ultimates are going on at any given time and the screen is covered in particle effects and riotous nonsense. That can be difficult to deal with, and yet I feel that if they sort the spectating out and they figure out a good way of spectating the game, I think that Overwatch will be an incredibly enjoyable competitive game to watch. I think it will perhaps be the first PC game to really get up to CSGO's level, or at least kind of close to it. I don't expect it to surpass CSGO in terms of popularity, and honestly, the competitive scene for CSGO is amazing. What they've been able to do with that game over the last few years is nothing short of astounding, and it's really great to see that happen. I think Overwatch has a lot of potential lessons to learn from CSGO, and yet, of the games that Blizzard has created over the past few years, I really feel that this is the first one that's actually set up to be competitive, to actually be a viable esport, and not really require much forcing to make that happen. I feel that Hearthstone's esports scene sort of came out of nowhere just due to the popularity of the game, and I feel that Heroes of the Storm's esports scene has been very much forced. And yet, of course, it has an audience, and that's great, and yet, Overwatch, I can just see some incredible possibilities. Not only because you can play really well and you can be highly skillful with certain characters, which will be a joy to watch. You can get those clutch plays in there, but you've got the ultimates, which gives you those amazing League of Legends and Dota moments only in a first-person shooter. Add to that the strategy of dynamic comp shifting in the actual match itself, and seeing the meta change before your eyes and interesting strategies be created on the fly, and I think you've got a very compelling experience there to watch as an esports or FPS fan. I think it'll work, I really do, and I hope that Blizzard is able to capitalize on that. So far, so good, right? I mean, I'm talking about this game as if it's almost the second coming, and it's not, but it's really, really good for what it is. It's a very well-polished team-based FPS that's got a lot going for it and is easy to enter and easy to have a good time in, and yet hard to master and be genuinely good at. It has a lot of class variety. As a result, it also has a lot of weapon variety. You're dealing with all manner of different things, from the longest range weapons that can snipe you across the map to a short-ranged freeze gun or an armored gorilla's fist. You got all sorts of things going on with that. Admittedly, you can't switch weapons with the vast majority of characters. You're kind of stuck with what you got, which I really do believe is why you should compare it very much to a Dota-style game and not necessarily to a first-person shooter in that regard. You know, you're not changing weapons, you're not picking weapons. You have a class, you have a character, and that character has a kit, and that's the kit that you will use and you'll be stuck with. And I have to wonder if they will allow you to customize that a little bit more as the game evolves and is actually released. But right now, the character variety feels good enough, and I don't easily get bored with it. But is there anything that the game doesn't do all that well? I certainly think there's a few things. I mean, one, having no server browser is not necessarily ideal. They're saying that private servers should be an option at some point, and I think that's going to be required if you want private clan scrimmages and all that sort of thing in a competitive scene. I would like to see that, and I'd also like to, of course, see the ability to customize the rule set Right now, the matchmaking in the beta is a little bit questionable, especially if you're queuing as a 6-man team. Finding another pre-made can take forever. And of course, I'm always going to be in favor of having a server browser as opposed to just matchmaking. You can have both. It's not like you can't have both. It's very easy to set that up, but I would certainly like to see that implemented. Albeit we are, of course, talking about a beta that's quite a few months out from release, so hopefully that'll be something they put in there. Proper ranking, proper ladder, something along those lines. Is that important? Well, I think it's only really important for teams, although it's not like you don't have solo MMR and ranking in both League and Dota, and of course even Counter-Strike. It seems like that kind of thing needs to be there in order to keep people playing for the long term and really give them the stats which say, hey, you're improving, you're getting better. If I want to play super seriously and super competitively, I'd like to be matched up with people that also have the skill level to do that. So that's something they need to work on. I think the biggest problem the game currently has, outside of the mystery surrounding its business model post-launch, is probably the lack of game modes. Only having 2 game modes is really not that great compared to the vast majority of other games. Now, don't get me wrong, you could be a competitive game with just 1 mode. I mean, just look at Counter-Strike. Demolition is the mode that you play. That said, though, I think that while there are some innovations in Overwatch, it's done the very standard Blizzard thing of taking elements from different games and polishing them up and making something more of the sum of its parts, and yet not really innovating in any particular area. The lack of game modes, I think, is probably the biggest example of that. There's nothing new there. There's not even a spin, really, on payload or anything along those lines, and there do seem to be a couple of aspects of those modes that could be improved, such as showing checkpoints for the payload on the little payload indicator. I mean, we don't know when we're going to reach a checkpoint based on just glancing at that, and I think that that could certainly be improved there. I would also appreciate some kind of UI customization. I don't think the UI is too bad, but you're always going to want people that want to change things around, whether they be crosshairs, whether they be eliminating those giant 5 kills, 10 kills, big things that get in the way. We don't need that there. Maybe we could move where the ultimate indicator is, for instance. Those are the sort of things that could be customized and moved around to your preference, and I'd like to see that done. I don't think the UI is awful, but I think there are definitely better ways to do it. And usually allowing the player to move elements of the UI around is the best way to keep everybody happy. I also think perhaps that Blizzard needs to look into more ways of incentivizing support play. This is always going to be a problem. I mean, this has been a problem in FPS, this has been a problem in Dota-style games and all that kind of thing. They did make a great decision of keeping a sort of KD indicator hidden away. You can see your own KD, but you can't see anybody else's, which I think is very smart. And at the end of the game, they give out awards such as Most Damage Blocked, which is very important. I'm not going to get the highest damage as a tank, but I might get the most damage blocked, or I might get the most healed, or whatever. And they even have this little indicator in the corner, which is called being on fire. And if you stay alive, you end up on fire, and it doesn't benefit you in any way, but it's a nice little stat to have. And at the end of every match, it also tells you whether or not you beat the average, and gives you statistics and all that sort of thing. The problem is in the middle of the game, I don't feel there's enough to really incentivize a lot of support play, and some of the support characters are maybe not that enjoyable to play. I think Mercy and Symmetra are perhaps the ones that fall into that in particular. Symmetra has these little turrets which are very easily destroyed, and she's quite difficult to play on the attack. She also has a very passive kind of healing mechanic where she just throws a shield on people and then it's just fire and forget until you die and have to refresh it. She's a very utilitarian kind of character that I feel maybe just needs a little bit more in her kit to make her interesting. I like playing her because I think she can really change the game around, but you can see a lot of people just ignoring her and going for the more fun characters, going for the characters with the ultimates that can wipe out 5 people at a time, and certainly incentivizing, rewarding, and more importantly maybe highlighting that great support play is a way to encourage more of it. The play of the game that is shown at the end is more often than not just an assault character hitting their ultimate on 3 people, or a sniper killing 3 people in 5 seconds, which is actually not that impressive, and it seems to be perpetuating this idea that the assault characters are the guys that get things done, when really it seems like the support and of course the tanks are the ones who are really keeping the game together. Outside of that though, it does seem to me that the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to this game post-launch is going to be its business model. Now, they announced that it would actually be a pay-up-front model, which some people didn't like. I can understand why some people wouldn't like it, but simultaneously I think there are benefits to it. I feel like you get a more complete product, and you can also avoid a lot of the potential trappings of FPS when it comes to free-to-play. Pay-to-win is a term that is frequently abused and misused these days, but there's a real risk with a competitive FPS if you have a pay-to-win aspect, whether it be the acquisition of characters or weapons or, of course, boosts more egregiously, that some people are going to say, well, if I don't pay, I have a fundamental disadvantage to these other guys. I think that putting a paywall up front is going to avoid a lot of that. It's going to hopefully avoid some of the negativity that comes from the ability to just be an awful human being and just restart an account and continue to troll and be a waste of space. Admittedly, it's going to shrink the size of the community, but you've got to bear in mind the particular advantages that Blizzard has. When it comes to selling games, Blizzard can sell you an expansion or a game up front for $40 to $60, and they can still sell millions of copies. And they're one of the companies that can reliably do that. Even though they have a couple of successful free-to-play games, they are still selling games in a traditional style. The question is whether or not it will stay a traditional style. What has been made abundantly clear is that they're going to be releasing skins for characters. I'm entirely okay with that. I think that that is a very good way to do post-launch monetization when it comes to first-person shooters without running the risk of selling maps, which of course splits the community, and selling characters, which in a game like Overwatch I think would be a death sentence. More so than almost any other game, it would be absolutely awful, because even a game like League of Legends, which of course locks characters behind paywalls or unlocking via in-game currency, still allows you to pick a composition and stick with it before the game begins. So, okay, maybe I don't have this AD carry, but maybe I've got access to this AD carry. That'll probably work pretty well here, and you can form a composition that way. The thing with Overwatch is that Overwatch is about switching comps on the fly. If I don't have access to all the characters that my opponent's team does, I can't necessarily switch to a composition that will adapt and counter what they're doing. And that means that you have a genuine possibility of this pay-to-win nonsense, where some guy has 20 characters, some guy has 5, and of those 5 characters, you can't find one that really works against this guy, you can't put a good comp together, and that's a real problem. Now, of course, on launch, this is not going to be an issue. 21 characters for everybody in the box. But the question is, are they going to add new characters, and how are they going to do it? If they actually make you pay, I think that that is a very bad idea. I think that that is a huge mistake for the reason that I've just mentioned. This is a game about switching comps on the fly. Imagine if Team Fortress 2 had characters locked behind walls like that, and it's like, damn, we need a Slayer or something. Let's just make some characters up here. We need a Slayer, which is one of the now 15 imaginary characters I just came up with. Oh, but nobody on the team has a Slayer. Well, I guess we lose then. That's an awful idea. You would never want that. Now, if you're going to sell characters, I think the only way to do it is with the expansion model. Release like 10 to 15 at a time as an expansion pack, and then of course segregate those expansion users. And don't do it that often. When it comes to StarCraft 2, for instance, they've segregated the ladders, so if you only have Wings of Liberty, you don't play against guys that have Heart of the Swarm. For obvious reasons, you wouldn't have the same units. It would be ridiculous. And of course, the same with Legacy of the Void. I feel you can maybe do that. Of course, you do run into the same problem of splitting the community, but at least you only split it in big chunks. Map packs, I feel, split the community in smaller chunks. With games like, say, Call of Duty, you get 4 map packs in a year. That means that you have a huge combination of different categories of player. You have the guys that don't have any map packs, you have the guys that have 1 map pack, but maybe this guy has a different map pack to the other guy. You have this guy that has all the map packs, this guy has all of them but 1. And of course, you get a fragmenting of the community that way. If you release expansion packs every couple of years, yes, you split the community, but generally speaking, you're doing it in a way that is still going to allow both of these factions to have a lot of players. You're going to have the guys that didn't buy the expansion and the guys that did. And they're going to be 2 big groups, hopefully. I think you can make it work that way. Ideally, though, and maybe this is just pie-in-the-sky, wishy-washy idealism that would never work, if they go purely cosmetic, I feel that's the best way to go. I think what they've got is a very interesting lineup of characters that people care about. If you look at BlizzCon and see how many people cosplayed the characters or bought statues of the characters. I mean, for God's sake, the $150 Tracer statue was sold out within hours of the start of BlizzCon. People love that character. They love loads of them. Everybody has their own favorite character. At BlizzCon, they were giving out pins and t-shirts that had the different character icons on it, and they were by far some of the most popular things at the show. Everybody has their favorite character. Everybody has a character they hate already, and the game isn't even out yet. And that is something very rare. That is something that only the top Dota-style games do, and only the top FPS like TF2 manage. TF2 injected a huge amount of character into its 9 classes. And as a result, they became quotable. You could sell merchandise. You could encourage people to buy hats and customization for their characters. People really cared about the scout and the heavy and the pyro. They weren't just their kit. And I think that Overwatch can be that. Very much so. With enough development of the lore and the backstory, it can really be that. And if you do that well, then you get people to buy skins. I care a lot about Winston. He's my favorite character. I would buy skins for Winston in a heartbeat. No problem at all. I'd reskin his weapon. I'd reskin his character. Absolutely. Because I'm invested in him as a character. He's a character that I enjoy. And more to the point, you are more likely to get people to buy skins if you leave all the heroes available for them all the time. People don't buy skins for characters that, of course, they don't own. And as a result, you're going to limit the amount of people who are willing to do that. If you say, here they are, all the characters, you're going to find that people are much, much more likely to be willing to buy cosmetics, especially since they can switch mid-game to that character with the funny hat and really make an impression. I think there are all sorts of possibilities for really cool monetization when it comes to cosmetic stuff that doesn't affect the game. And I think, honestly, even if you have an upfront paywall, that is fine. It's not only fine, I'd encourage it. I think that's the best way to support a game post-launch. I really hope they go down that route. I hope that they have the guts to do it. I think Blizzard is one of the only companies that can really pull it off. They can't do the same thing that Valve did. They don't have the technology, you know, they don't have the marketplace. The stuff that CSGO and TF2 and Dota have done for monetization is insane and almost impossible to replicate. Selling compendiums, the whole idea of gambling with in-game items, crate unboxings, rares and cosmetics and community-created content. This is the sort of thing that only a company with the infrastructure and the marketplace and the technology that Steam has could pull off. But that doesn't mean you can't do other things. And I think that people do care about these characters and are willing to buy skins to support them. They're willing to buy hats, they're willing to buy spray packs, whatever. Things to customize their game. I think that's the way to go. And I think if it does that, you've got a very enjoyable game experience. You know, what's interesting about Overwatch is that I've never once felt like I ever needed some kind of progression in that game. I've played it, as I said, for over 40 hours in the beta so far, and I've never felt bored. Every match is different. Every match plays out a little bit differently because they're always a different composition of people, a different composition of characters and different situations that arise as a result of that. I always feel like I'm getting a little bit better. Those team-focused plays, those big moments are incredibly satisfying. They're the sort of thing that you cheer with your friends on voice over IP for. As a Dota player, I'm identifying the parts of Dota that I love the most in Overwatch. And that to me is wonderful, because I love that team play aspect. And when a plan comes together, it's the most satisfying thing in the world. That's kept me playing. Obviously, the addition of new maps and game modes would be kind of important because some people do get bored of games easier than I do, but let's be honest, you know, people play Counter-Strike on the same maps with the same guns and have been doing it for over 10 years now. If you make a game that is interesting and competitive and evolves throughout the match and is a different match every time, then absolutely people will keep playing it. If you create a game that rewards skill and teamwork and yet still gives those amazing esports moments, people will keep playing it. Doesn't matter if you can't unlock a weapon, doesn't matter if you don't get a level up. To me, what Overwatch is a combination of great gunplay, excellent character design, awesome teamwork, some great maps, and a genuinely enjoyable competitive FPS experience that has a fairly low barrier to entry, but a ridiculously high skill ceiling. It's an FPS that people that don't even enjoy FPS can play. And yet those that do will find something that they like here as well. It's sort of an everyman's team-focused FPS with something for everybody, and yet it does that without compromising its competitive core. That's what I think of Overwatch right now. I think it's one of the most exciting properties that Blizzard has launched since StarCraft 2. I think it is the most exciting property that they've launched since StarCraft 2. Is it original? No, absolutely not. Does it borrow ideas from everywhere else? Absolutely. But it gets to the core of what Blizzard is good at. Nicking the best bits from other games and polishing them up to a mirror shine and then creating a recipe that's more than the sum of its parts. That is Overwatch to me. I really think it's got a bright future. I believe in this game. I want to continue to play this game. I'm probably going to play more of this game when I stop recording and editing this video. I play it every day. I've been playing it every day since the beta started, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. Clearly, this is the same feeling that people get from TF2. It's the same feeling they get from LoL or Dota or anything along those lines. Capturing that feeling is difficult, not relying on a progression treadmill to keep people interested with little colored food pellets. It's difficult. Most games can't pull it off. And yet I think that Overwatch really has. It's shockingly polished for the current state that it's in. It's got a lot of content, and to me it seems like things can only go onward and upward for that game. And I'm looking forward to it coming out. Now, if you don't mind, I think I'm going to go back to playing. There are my thoughts on Overwatch right now, ladies and gentlemen. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then by all means, do feel free to click the like button. If you didn't like it, click dislike. And I will see you next time.